power of the sun. In the palm of your hand. Oh god, I can't, oh my god. Alright, let me collect myself, guys. Alright, David here. And welcome to a review I've been anticipating and also kind of procrastinating, just ever so slightly. And that is for the Toybiz Spider-Man 2 figures that I got right here. I feel like this is now the appropriate time to cover these figures, despite my reluctance to do so due to not being able to find the accessories for Zipline Spider-Man because of the gimmick that he's got going, or the missing hand that Doc Ock is sporting right there. As you can see, he's looking like Captain Hook. I feel obligated to get him a hook or something to kind of accommodate for that, as well as his glasses. I have not been able to find his glasses, sadly, amongst the rummages of my house. So sadly, we're just gonna have to carry on through because I feel like right now is the most appropriate time to cover these figures due to the hype around No Way Home, events unfolding in that film that I'm not really going to talk about here, since there's still a possibility that some people have not seen the movie by some chance. But if you have, you know how significant these figures are, not only for the sake of this review, but also for my childhood. These are the original Toybiz figures from 2004, specifically the default 6-inch Doc Ock, and then the 6-inch Spider-Man here that is designed to be a Zipline Spider-Man figure behind a gimmick where he actually attaches himself to a zipline, and using this little concoction, this little gun, he shoots a little bullet into a billboard that happens to have the Mary Jane perfume ad on it, but it's magnetized, so he's able to kind of attach himself to that billboard, zipline along the way, and that's the whole gimmick behind the figure. Again, don't have those accessories, so we're just gonna have to cover the bare bones figures themselves, but frankly, for the memories and the nostalgia that they provide, they'll be enough. Let's start off with Spidey himself. I feel like we need to start off with him because despite not being able to find his accessories again to be able to show off the gimmick, he is actually the most complete here. He's the one that's not really missing anything in particular, except for the actual circumstances of the figure as far as molding and articulation are concerned, but we'll get to that. As you can see right here, in my opinion, my humble opinion, this is honestly one of the better represented Spider-Man 2 figures. I understand that there was a dedicated superposable version of this figure that is designed to have all the right joints, all the right points of articulation, and the right molding going around with some parts of the figure itself to accommodate that default figure that you need to have that's not really hidden behind a gimmick. It doesn't come with an extra quirk or accessory. It's just meant, even though I think he did come with like a gargoyle piece that he can hang off of and some web accessories. But aside from that, he's meant to just be a really posable Spider-Man figure. Despite having the gimmick of the zipline accessories, this figure itself that came packaged in is actually posable in and of himself. I was actually, even back then when I was a mere 13 years old, I thought to myself, this guy is actually posable enough that I could use him in some stop motion animations. And now here he is resurfacing again. And I would say for the time that they were in and the actual production behind the figure, Toybiz kind of outdid themselves because, again, this is meant to be a much more gimmick-centric figure, and yet the detailing going around the costume, the spider symbol here on the back, as well as the webbing going throughout the chest symbol, and then to me, my favorite part would have to be the head, specifically the eyes and the molding going around his eyes and the actual mask portion of the head. I feel like it's one of the more accurate ones. Like nothing looks too off. It's perfectly centered, perfectly symmetrical, while at the same time still keeping the little touches of the Raimi suit intact. And that still bleeds on over for the rest of the figure. I would say the only area that they kind of faltered on just a tiny bit is the color scheming. The red is on point, but I feel like the blue is a little too muted. I understand that there's certain shots in the movie where it looks muted in and of itself, but that's primarily because of the color grading. We know from behind the scenes photos, stock pictures, set stills, all that stuff that it is blue. It's just that there's certain frames and shots where the cinematography looks a little off, that it makes it look muted, specifically during the train sequence. And Toybiz might have taken that a little too much to heart here in this version of the figure since they muted the blue, but at least the patterning, the little cell pattern going around here on the blue part of this suit, or what would have been the blue part, is still intact. It's still present there along with the webbing, like I said. And overall, the sculpting and the detail is actually really, really good for what's meant to be, again, a gimmicky 6-inch figure. Articulation is also nothing to scoff at. Like, it's the fact that this is still meant to be a gimmicky figure, and yet they were able to jam pack as many points of articulation as they could have, is really astonishing. Specifically here in the head, you'll see we actually got 2 joints here on the neck. The one at the top that of course allows mobility 360 degrees, but then we even got another one here at the base of the neck that does move. Now, you could argue that at some point you wonder yourself, why is there so much articulation going on right there, especially since he can only move up and down so slightly. But just the fact that you're able to kind of give him like a twisted neck look, like he's actually flexing his neck, is really, really cool. Now, the molding around the trapezoids of his body, if you will, right here does look a little too broad. But once you take the context of the articulation in mind, that's where things get understandable. So, specifically here in the shoulder area, because not only were they content with just a ball joint for mobility 360 degrees vertically, but you even have an extra cylindrical piece right here, a cylindrical rubber piece inside to allow flexibility of the arm outwards that much out, and then furthermore by the ball joint. So he can actually flex out his arms really, really extensively, if you will. And that is crazy. Again, for a gimmicky figure, not even the superposable one. The superposable one, I'm pretty sure has this, but the fact that this is not even that figure is mind-blowing. Then we get 2 joints right here in the elbow. Even before McFarlane started to kind of do that with all their figures, you actually got 2 joints in the elbow that allow bendability about that far in. And then you do have a wrist swivel right here in the forearm, actually, rather than the wrist, that allows rotation horizontal 360 degrees. And then you have a swivel or a joint right here at the wrist that allows the wrist to be able to bend inwards and outwards about that far. Now, sadly, this is the only area of the figure where it did kind of mess up on the sculpting, but again, it did so in favor of the gimmick, which is that both hands have that little circular cutout there for him to hold the zipline, if you will. But of course, knowing Spidey, you know that at least one hand needs to be relaxed or gripping, and then the other hand has to have the web motion, the web zipping motion or web spinning motion, the gesture, if you will. However, that's not found here, so when posing the figure or when utilizing him in my stop motion shorts, obviously I had to I had to improvise, kind of, write it into the jokes or do something with it. So it is what it is. Then you do have one horizontal cut right here on the waist that allows mobility 360 degrees, like so. Then we get to the ball joints here on the legs, where there is a caveat. He is able to move the legs forward about that far, but absolutely no movement back, as you can see, due to the way that his butt is sculpted. You got the back paneling butt sculpt going on right there, so obviously all motion just stops completely when moving the legs back. And it's funny, because initially I thought that was a pet peeve, but now I'm actually kind of glad and thankful for the piece being molded the way that it is, because sadly, after owning this figure for well over damn near 2 decades, these joints have actually loosened to the point where all I have to do is just do this. And as you can see, both legs are completely just shuffling about. And if that piece was not there to stop them, we would have chaos. Horizontally, however, they are able to move about that far outwards, but yeah, I start to feel some hesitance. I don't know if it's because of age or because of the way that the figure was molded, so I'm not gonna press it too far and push my luck. But similar to the elbow, we have 2 joints once again here in the knee that allow movement about that far back. Then we get to the ankle, and we got a straightforward vertical joint that allows movement of the ankle forwards about that much, and then backwards about that. And lo and behold, even back then in 2004, Toybiz threw in the toesies. You have that going on right there. So as you can see, my argument still stands that this, despite being a Zipline Spider-Man figure, he's actually posable enough that he can actually make himself worthwhile by just being himself, as Spider-Man always is. Now, let's get him, and as you can see right there, a little bit of that looseness in those top legs kind of rear their ugly head just a tiny bit upon posability. But let's go ahead and move him back so that now we can tackle Doc Ock right here. This is now meant to be the default 6-inch Doc Ock, so no gimmicks. This is meant to be the fully posable one. And for the most part, Toybiz once again gave him a very presentable look. You can see right there, he's definitely molded after Alfred Molina. Granted, you can only do so much in the 6-inch scale, so I feel like they did an adequate job of capturing his likeness there, but he's going to have some things here and there that are a little bit off. But for the most part, the color shading on the skin, as well as the molding of the face and the overall likeness is actually pretty on par and really good. Moving on down, you'll see that they actually did a good job with the coat, albeit you have a couple of paint applications going around with the buttons that are a little off, but for the most part, they got the detailings just right. My personal favorite paint application would have to be, of course, around the waist harness of the tentacles. You can see that they got the color shading and the sculpting and the detailing going on right there. Really, really good. Then we get to the pants, and the pants are, black. They got the little bit of pocket detailing, but other than that, you got the creases and very standard issue for Toybiz in the 6-inch variety. And that, of course, carries on over to the shoes. They're brown, they're detailed, got a little bit of lining right there going on for the shoelaces. But other than that, nothing really to write home about. It's when we get to the tentacles. The tentacles, of course, similar to that 12-inch Doc Ock figure that I covered before. This guy's got it going on with the tentacles, and Toybiz recognized that, because it's once we get to the tentacles that the detailing really comes into full force. And you can see right there that even in 6-inch scale, the detailing on the tentacles is actually rather cool. Now, of course, because of the scope and the scaling, they could only do so much, but I feel like they did a spectacular job, no pun intended, with what they had working. You got, of course, the chrome matted detailing going around for 2/3 of the actual circumference of the tentacle. Once you get to the bottom part, they add this little like damaged or scraped out orangey yellowish kind of detail going around the bottom of the tentacle like he does in the movie. And then we get to the respective claws, where they made sure to represent them very adequately. You got the top claws that are, of course, a little bit more pointy, albeit, again, similar to that 12-inch scale figure. I don't know how to feel about the actual paint applications they added here. You got just a little bit of red there in the middle, and then blue spray paint going on around here in the outside part of the claw. Not a huge fan of that, but I understand that from a distance, they needed to come up with something to kind of distinguish these claws from the bottom ones. But the molding and the sculpting is doing that already, so I feel like that was kind of unnecessary to add the little blue right there, because you look closer and you'll see that they did a decent job of molding a little bits of detail inside of the claws respectively. Specifically, the little centerpiece right here with the little diode that is meant to be the little light inside to indicate if the tentacles are evil or not. You see right there, they actually did a really good job of bringing those details out to the forefront, and that still also carries on over to the bottom claws, where you'll notice that they got the bigger grips at the edges of the claws themselves. They're meant to be thicker pieces. You got the cylindrical little portions right there, as well as the inner part of the, I guess you could call it the flower. You'll notice it's a little bit better detail, but also broader, give it that grippier look. So they really spared no expense as far as how they made the claws out to look. So the blue spray paint going around here on the top parts, it stands out a little too ugly to me. Now, this being the default Doc Ock figure, they are obviously going to make sure to put as much detail into the character as possible. And being that Doc Ock is still nevertheless human, you got the traditional points of articulation. You got, of course, the head that's able to rotate about that far to the right and about that far to the left. I start to get a little bit of resistance there. I can't make out if it's because of the coat or just simply because of the way that the joint just simply is made, so I'm not going to stress it. But unlike Spidey, he can actually move the head forwards and upwards a little more than Spidey can. It still leaves a little bit to be desired, but it's actually a little better than I anticipated, even years back. Then you get to the ball joint here on the shoulder, and it's able to rotate 360 degrees vertically. I'm not going to do it all the way through here because it does interfere with the tentacle, but he can do it, as well as, of course, flex about outwards, actually almost all the way across upwards like that. And as you can see, one of the claws came off. Spoiler alert, you can remove the claws. I was going to get to that a little bit later, but there's no way I'm going to be able to cover the articulation of Doc himself here without interfering with the tentacles, so might as well remove that one right there. But you can remove the tentacles in case you ever want to pose them a little bit more freely and relaxingly, if you want to call it that. But in terms of the articulation for Doc himself, you saw the ball joint in action there for the top of the arm. Sadly, only one joint in the elbow, but of course he's not meant to be Spidey, so that's just fine. And then we get a wrist swivel right about there on his only remaining hand that he's got going on. Nothing as far as torso, which is understandable considering the harness piece right there is completely glued on and all one giant piece. But we get to the legs, and surprisingly, quite a bit of articulation going on in the legs. You got a ball joint here at the top that is able to move the leg forward about that much, outwards about that much. In fact, I would argue it's able to move outwards more so than Spidey. And I believe it can move backwards. The butt sculpt is not as prevalent as that on Spidey's, but there's really no point since the coat is going to get in the way. You do have a swivel at the top of the leg that's able to rotate horizontally about that far in and then that far out. And then two joints at the knee that's able to bend about that far backwards, as you see right there. And then I don't know why figures do this, but you do have an ankle joint that's able to flex the ankle about that far back and then that far forward. But sadly, because of the way that this rim around the pants is sculpted, it's not a whole lot of movement that I feel like that joint could allow if it wasn't for the way that this was designed. Other than that, though, you do get toesies, which is crazy considering this is Doc Ock. You know, I personally didn't feel like he needed them, but they did throw them in and they are there. But who needs articulation on the body when you got articulation on the tentacles? Now, the tentacles are actually a unique beast, and you know, we kind of already knew that. But as you can see, they are removable, and the reason why is because the inside of the tentacles themselves are made up of this stiff wire similar to that of those pipe cleaners that allows the tentacles to be bent and molded to how you see fit for posability and design. So it's kind of neat that it allows that while at the same time retaining the detail of the spinal look to the tentacles themselves that I am just in love with. I love the way that the tentacles look out, especially after posing them due to this functionality. So I always thought that was pretty cool. Once you get to the claws themselves, all four have the respective joints that you see before you here. You have joints on the inside that allow the claws to either fully close or fully open, as well as an additional joint in the middle that allows the claws to kind of have like this more angry, fierce look, like you see right there. And then, of course, an additional joint that allows the claw itself to rotate in place here at the end of the tentacle. So pretty cool that even at the 6-inch, you know, Toybiz really knew exactly what people would have wanted in a Doc Ock figure, and you see that coming here in full force, even all the way back to 2004. Now, personally, all these years later, I do feel like the actual piece or peg right here that's designed to go inside of Doc's harness here on the back could have clipped a little bit better because it fits in place and you can kind of feel it slide in, but it's also very, very prone to coming off very, very easily if you give it just a slight tug. So I feel like they could have molded it in a way that it could have clasped in or popped in. You can feel like a satisfying pop to give you the assurance, as you see right there, it's coming off already, to give you the assurance that it's actually going to stay in, because otherwise you're going to be relying on the coat to grip it in a way that will make sure it's staying in place as opposed to just the peg itself, because the peg doesn't really do a great job of holding it in its area there. On top of that, the articulation on his legs is not the best, that he does fall an awful lot due to top heaviness, and because of that, your solutions would be either to rely on his coat as like a way to hold him up in place, or better yet, give the bottom tentacles, as you see right here like I did, some functionality by posing them to make it look like they're keeping him up. Because if you try to pose this guy with the tentacles facing forwards as opposed to down and holding him up in place like you see before you here, he is going to be falling over and over and over. That, like I said, you're either going to need the coat or you're just going to have to fall back on this pose right here, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get this guy to stand on his own, or make him look like he's actually standing up naturally, as opposed to having him use the coat and make him look like he's like squatting or doing some weird kind of pose. Sadly, this is the part of the review where generally I would talk about accessories that come with the figure, but like I mentioned at the beginning, I couldn't find them. I tried looking all over the house, and either they've been unfortunately tossed out due to the recent makeover that I did late last year for my room, or there's still somewhere within the vicinity. I just haven't looked hard enough. But I needed to get this review out because, again, watching No Way Home, seeing things unfold, it just kind of tugged at my heartstrings enough that I looked at these guys and thought to myself, you know what? Screw the accessories. We don't need an extra hand or the glasses for Doc Ock, which is honestly the only accessory that he came with. But with Zipline Spider-Man, it would have been nice to show off how that gimmick works, especially with the Mary Jane billboard being kind of, taken from the movie and being part of that part of the film that is very nostalgic for my childhood. But the figures themselves still hold up even after almost 2 decades of being in my collection here. That No Way Home, working in conjunction with the past Spider-Man films, made me look at these figures and go, yeah, they're still a little rough around the edges, whether it be with some detailing or some articulation or whatever thing you can come up with here. But Toybiz really still honed in on what made these characters special and kind of made that transcend through the figures themselves. Because this guy in particular could have been a simple gimmick figure, and yet they still tossed in a plethora of articulation and accuracy to his costume. And then Doc Ock has the tentacles be what you've always wanted Doc Ock tentacles to look and feel like, even on a 6-inch scale. And personally, despite the missing accessories or the bumps and tosses that the figures have endured with the physical problems that they got, these are 2 still very near and dear figures in my collection that I honestly don't see myself parting with them anytime soon. And I can only hope that as my kids grow up and inherit these figures, they will try to do better. Thank you guys for watching. Check out this other playlist showing up on screen right here for other Spider-Man videos. And as always, stay humble.